and welcome to Sonder. My name is Maggie and I am a knitter, sewist, general crafter, voracious reader, and new doctor living here in Denver, Colorado. How is everyone? It is the 2nd of January, 2022, and I am feeling thankful. I, as expected, did not complete Vlogmas. I don't think I ever have, but I did have a lot of fun in the days that I did it, showing off kind of what I've been getting up to and the books that I've read throughout the year and the crafts that I've been working on during the winter season, and I'll go over some of those during today's episode. But yeah, stopped vlogging part of the way through, mostly because I went up to Steamboat and spent a ton of time skiing and spending time with family and really just enjoying the winter wonderland that is my hometown. I'll put some footage so you can see what it looks like up there, but I come from a really beautiful, beautiful small town in northwest Colorado that is a ski resort town, and it is just one of the most breathtakingly beautiful places on earth. And got to spend about a week and a half up there with my family and with my husband's family, and it was incredible. I just cross-country skied. It's the first year that I've ever not downhill skied since I was like 5 years old or younger, so it's excuse me, it's a little weird to have not done that, but we got to spend so much time cross-country skiing, and I found a new love in that sport. For me, I grew up cross-country skiing in gym class mostly. So when we were little kids in elementary school, we would Friday afternoon gym class was we would strap on our cross-country skis and we would cross-country ski, I think about 1 to 2 miles down to this little cabin in the woods, and there would be a person there who would make us hot cocoa, and we would drink our hot cocoa or our tea, and then we would cross-country ski back and go back to class, which is just so wild. Sometimes I'm just like, what world, what magical world did you grow up in? But it was incredibly, incredibly peaceful, and I'm feeling very thankful to have been able to spend time with my family and to have it be safe. My entire family is fully vaccinated and boosted and have been taking the pandemic very, very seriously, and so it felt really good to be able to spend time with my brother and my sister and my parents and Sean's family. It was just really, really lovely. The year ended in pure and utter chaos here in Colorado, in the Front Range of Colorado, which is where I live now, Boulder. So what I'm discussing before Steamboat is sort of the mountain region of Colorado, within the mountain region of Colorado. But where I live and where I work now is in Denver, which is what we call the Front Range, which is essentially the plains of Colorado that butt right up against the mountains. And for those of you who are international or national but just not in Colorado, we had some horrible, horrible brush fires that started on the 31st of December and destroyed nearly 1,000 homes. It was like over 900 houses that were completely lost by these forest fires that went into the communities. There were a couple of towns that were particularly impacted, and those are towns that are really close to my heart because they're very, very close to where I went to college. So about a 30-minute drive from where I live now in Denver is a beautiful town called Boulder, Colorado, and the surrounding areas around Boulder were the ones most hit by these fires. So it was wild. Most of my good friends from college still live in Boulder, and the surrounding areas. And I'm so, so thankful that nobody that I know lost their home, but many, many, many people did. And it was just a horrible end to a very rough year. We've just had a hard time. And we, I mean, the collective we, you know, all of us have lived through a lot this year. And I think, you know, to say that I saw somewhere that 2021 was like the worst, what was it? The worst like remake of 2020. And I could not agree more. It was just, 2021 just lingered. And there were some amazing and wonderful things that happened in 2021. And so I don't want to detract from that in any way. But man, it was a hard year, and I'm happy to have it behind us. And I'm really hoping that 2022 will bring with it a rebirth of sorts, something different, something better. I just think we all need a break, especially with this Omicron variant and everything that's been going on. I just, you know, the world needs a rest. And so I am very thankful to have had nobody close to me impacted by these fires. And we've donated to many, many different relief funds, which it's so hard because you know, there's so much loss that they've raised so much money already, but it's like the amount of reconstruction that needs to happen is just astounding. And so we've done our part, we've done our best, but if you have it in your soul to donate to one of the causes that will go directly to helping families impacted by the fires in Colorado, I will put a link below. And I know the holidays are an incredibly hard time to be asking anyone for money, but so no hard feelings if you're not able to donate. I would say, please just keep these people in your thoughts and remember that we're all just getting through this crazy life together. So with that, I am also very thankful to have the craft that is knitting and sewing to some extent. I mostly sew just because I like having sewn objects, but I don't really love the act of sewing in the same way that I love the act of knitting and find a lot of solace and comfort in knitting. And so I've been incredibly thankful to have that craft in my life, and want to move on to showing a little bit about what I've been working on in the last few months or last few weeks. There are a lot of finished objects that I had that I do not have with me anymore. Most of them are hats for children. Hats and some sweaters for children and also for my sister, but it was a whirlwind of crafting to the very end. I was just trying to get a lot of things sewn and knitted up to give away as gifts for the holidays, and I managed to do it. I finished all of my Christmas gifts before Christmas this year, which I don't think I've ever done, and I think the only reason I was able to manage that is that a lot of the crafting that I did for gifts this year was sewing, and pretty much the only people who got handmade knitted objects, there were a couple of adults who did, but the majority of them were children. And so it was much smaller and much more manageable. But I have a lot to talk about. And what I was thinking is starting off by doing a more regular podcast episode where I'm going to go through the crafts that I'm working on right now, things that I've finished recently, and then of course move on to my reading. And then I thought that I would have another recorded episode. It's not really an episode, it's kind of a special thing where I will talk about my intentions for 2022 and some of the crafts that I hope to tackle in the coming year. So look out for that. It'll probably be coming a day or two after I release this episode, but I will just start off by talking about what I'm wearing. In this podcast, it's so funny. I feel like with so many other podcasters, they have like a million different sweaters, and every single episode they're wearing a different sweater. And for me, I'm often just wearing the same exact sweater. And there are a couple different reasons for that. One is that it is a cold, blustery day with snow on the ground here in Denver. And so I wanted to wear my KuusiKnits cardigan, which is probably this and my Peace Fleece garment are definitely my two warmest garments, especially when they're fully buttoned. But this is my KuusiKnits cardigan. I absolutely love it. It is an all over cable work pattern. I've worn it a bunch. And truthfully, I don't have that many sweaters in my wardrobe, which is crazy. I have knit a ton of sweaters, but I also give a lot of sweaters away. And that is just the nature of my being. I think I probably only have maybe 5 to 10 sweaters, probably closer to like 7 or 8 sweaters in my wardrobe. And that is because if I am not wearing a sweater very, very, very frequently, then I have no problem at all giving it away as a gift. And so this Christmas, for instance, I made this Caitlin Hunter sweater earlier this year that was made out of Fiber for the People yarn. And it's the V-neck one with the color work at the bottom. I'll try to insert a picture. And I love this sweater, but it just didn't fit me exactly how I wanted, and the color work wasn't as much of a contrast as I wanted, but I still really loved it, and I knew that my very, very good friend would just adore this sweater, and so I gave it to her for Christmas. I'm just not faffed with, or I have no issue at all. I don't know why I just tried to use like a British term. I don't even know what that means. Anyway, I am not concerned at all about giving my knits away, and so I actually went down to my luggage, because we literally just got home this morning, to pick out a different sweater because I feel like I've been wearing this one a lot, and I was looking at all my sweaters and I was like, first of all, this is the one I have on and this is the one I want to wear, and second of all, I really don't have that many sweaters. You've seen them all. It's not like I'm keeping a sweater from you that I haven't worn before. So anyway, I just went on and on about that. So let's move on to what I've been working on. Like I said, I have had many different finished objects. I think I made like 5 or 6 hats by, 5 or 6 Oslo hats by the Petite knitter. Like 3 of them were for kids and 2 of them were for adults. And I had a couple sweaters and things like that that I gave away, and had some sewing pouches and some other sewing goodies that I finished for holiday gifts, which I don't have with me anymore. Maybe I should have thought ahead. But if you are really, really interested in seeing those finished objects, you can go back through my Vlogmas videos because I definitely show them off in those. So I will just start by what I've been working on more recently. I am drinking some very delicious licorice tea right now. It's so comforting. Okay, so the first sweater I'm going to show, I am keeping in my very ridiculous Christmas sweater bag that I made last Christmas. And this is my Christmas sweater that I had anticipated wanting to finish this year, but I got behind in my gift knitting, and so this went by the wayside. And my plan is to actually close this bag, of course take out the needles because I'll need them. I don't have like a ton of different needles, so I'll take out the needles, close this bag, tie it up, put it downstairs, and take it back out next December. So I'm gonna show it off, but then I won't be finishing it until next year, or I guess this year, much later in the year. But this is my Christmas sweater that I was hoping to finish. And it is the Alaska sweater, which is this really beautiful sweater where it's just a raglan sweater, and then there's this motif of really rustic looking pine trees along the bottom of the sweater. And I am knitting this out of a couple of different yarns. One of them is the Harrisville Nightshades in the VCR colorway, which is this black, it looks black, but kind of a very dark green. And then when you get closer, it's this yarn that everybody has heard of, so I don't know why I'm describing it, but it is a more rustic yarn that is mainly black and then just has a little bit of green through it. So I am really loving this. I have a little Dumbledore pin on the back, which I'm going to take off of this now because I'm going to put this away and I'll be wondering where my Dumbledore pin is for so long. So I'm knitting it with this as well as with the Spin Cycle Dyed in the Wool in the Cold Comfort colorway, and I'm holding it with just a cream white colored mohair for the color work. So I'll show it off. Here's the front. I feel like the camera has no idea what to do with this. I'm gonna bring it a little bit closer so you can see more of the details. But as you can see, I got completely done with all of the raglan and most of the body and was just finishing up the color work of the trees. I did a really special thing with this where the color work on the trees, I decided, I'm gonna drop any stitches here. I decided for one tree on the front and one tree on the back, I was going to bead the tree so that it looks like it has fairy lights. So you can see here the tree that has the fairy lights on the front. And I'll show you the back as well. I love it. It's so subtle. It's more obvious, I think, in person that you see the one tree that has the lights, but I have really, really enjoyed working on this. I think it's so beautiful. One technique that I am using is the ladder back jacquard technique because as you can see, there are many very, very long floats between the trees, especially in the beginning of the color work motif. And so I have been using the ladder back jacquard method in order to catch my floats. Initially, I had to rip out all of the color work. Well, not all of it, but I had gotten probably an inch into the color work and I had to rip back and start the color work again because I wasn't doing the ladder back jacquard technique and it was not working well. You could really, really see the floats being caught on the front side of the work, and I think that that is particularly emphasized by the fact that there is the mohair. And so every time I was catching floats, it just looked like there was a line where the fabric got lighter when the trees started, and I really didn't like it. I just knew that it was gonna drive me nuts. And so I just ripped it out and started the color work again, which doesn't sound like a lot when you've only gone like an inch in, but I didn't have a lifeline or anything like that in there. And so it required me picking up these stitches in essentially black yarn. And so I didn't do it perfectly because it's a lot of stitches on the whole body. And then the other thing is that this color work, because you do have the long stitches and also because it is supposed to be more of a rustic tree, it's not an intuitive color work pattern. You're really having to look at the chart every single row and like really counting and staying on top of the charts as you're going. And so it makes it look like a much more beautiful, rustic, more realistic tree motif, but it also makes it a little bit less enjoyable color work, which I started another color work pattern. This is just a little teaser for what is to come, but I'm obsessed. And it is much more easy and rewarding color work than this is. This, I love the look, and I think I'm really, really gonna enjoy the finished object. Hopefully I'll take it out in like November so that it will be finished by December and I'll be able to wear it all December long, but I really, really love this and will finish it next year. You know, it is something where like I could finish it this year, but I get more enjoyment out of it when it's Christmas time. And I feel like the holiday season is over. So you will see that more this fall and winter. I am just gonna keep going with some of the Christmas makes, which is a little bit of sewing. So I have shared on my podcast several times some placemats that I was making earlier this summer for many different people who I knew who were getting married. And I decided to do a very similar technique, but to use very, very kitschy Christmas fabric and make this very similar placemats for my mom and for my husband's mom for Christmas. And I wasn't able to finish all of them. I really wanted to do a full like 10 or 12. And so I have some scraps left over, and truthfully, my plan is to try to finish these for next year. So again, I will just wrap them up, put them downstairs, and take them out next year and finish them up. But did want to show them off because I put a lot of work into them. These were the ones that were for my husband's mom, my mother-in-law, and they're all super beautiful. Some of it is Rifle Paper Co. I think these 3 fabrics are all Rifle Paper Co. fabrics. And then some of the others are just another really kitschy fabric. So I really enjoyed making these. It was a very, very fast gift. And then I just brought one, which this one just needs to be quilted and then have the binding put on. But this was the one that I made for my mom, which is a little bit different. And mainly that is because I used more blue and had some menorah fabric as well, because my father-in-law, or my stepfather, is Jewish. And so I wanted these ones to be a little bit less just Christmassy and a little bit more kind of Christmas Hanukkah mashup. So I will be finishing these next year, but just wanted to show you them because I did do a lot of sewing in the last little bit. My husband would come down and just be like, how are these gifts going? Which I am joking because he also made a lot of objects to put in with our gift baskets this year. So it was a joint effort, but my little fingers from sewing so much were very tired by the end, sewing and knitting. Okay. I am gonna save some of the more exciting things for last, so I'm just gonna go through these very quickly. This is my half and half triangles wrap by Purl Soho, and I did knit on this quite a bit. Man, I have a lot of progress keepers on here, but I think the last time I showed it, this is where I was. So I have knit quite a bit, and I'm almost done, I think, with this color triangle. So this is the Kiln Red colorway. I am just making this in the original colors. So it'll be Kiln Red, and then the other half of the half and half triangles wrap will be the Poppy Red. And I think that I will use this a lot and have found that this is a really enjoyable project, particularly if I am looking for just mindless knitting, which truthfully is not all the time, but I do like having something that I can just very, very easily pick up and work on and not have to check where I am, like I know what's going on, and we'll just keep popping away at this for the rest of the year. And this is in my favorite project bag. This is a project bag that was made for me by Kat of the Heather and Hops podcast. Ugh, I love it so much. It has squirrels that are, I think, machine knitted or maybe hand knitted. I don't know. They're like so cute. Anyway, I'm obsessed with this bag. But in here, I have my sock whip, which I have not put a ton of work on, but I have put like an inch or so, so I'm just gonna show it off. This colorway is the Indian Paintbrush colorway, which is a Wildfire, oof. It's been a time in Colorado. It's been a time. A wildflower here in Colorado. And it is a really, really beautiful flower. And I am knitting this just in rib and then reverse stockinette for the foot. This is actually, I had a friend who was just like wearing ready to wear socks, and they were in a 2x2 rib with a stockinette or reverse stockinette sock base. And I was like, I like that, I'm gonna make those. And yeah, I've just been knitting away at the second cuff. I don't know why, sock knitting is just not what I want to do right now, even though I love having hand knit socks and wearing them all the time. It's just not my most favorite thing to make. So the other thing that I have in here, of course, when I went up to Steamboat, I was like, what knitting am I gonna want to do? And so I brought a bunch of random things to work on. And the other thing I brought was these colorways, which are 5 colorways from my advent calendar this year. And I got the Lamb Strings Wool advent calendar, which was like a super goth. It was awesome. Anyhow, I grabbed these 5 colorways, and I do want to make these sprocket socks, which I have made once before, which is just a really easy slip stitch color work sock. And you can stripe them, and so I'm hoping to make those, but we'll see. Socks are, I do kind of want to try to make 1 pair of socks a month in the coming year, because I do feel like I really, really enjoy wearing hand knit socks all throughout the year, and my husband keeps asking me for more pairs of socks. And so I think if I just have socks with me all the time and just knit on them here and there, it would probably help get me through. Okay. The next thing that I have is I picked up and worked more on my Bouquet Sweater. I love this thing. I don't know why I set it down. I feel like I get stuck on Sleeve Island, but it's not really Sleeve Island. It's like I just stop working on things when it's at a good stopping point, and then I just put it aside. But picked up my Bouquet Sweater. So this is it. Oh, I love it so much. And this is such a warm sweater because it's all over color work in worsted weight wool. And I am knitting this out of Brooklyn Tweed Shelter, I think is the worsted weight one. And really, really loving it. This is in newsprint and hayloft. I love this sweater. It's so organic and so wacky. Anyhow, all I have to do is knit the sleeves on this thing. And so I picked up last night, I knew that I was gonna need some knitting in the car that is just plain stockinette, and I know that I could have knit on my socks, but why do that, you know? It's ridiculous. The way that my brain works sometimes, I'm like, I don't understand. Anyhow, this was what I decided to pick up, and so I picked up the sleeve and just started the decreases. So I am one of those people who I keep track of the decreases that I'm doing on sleeves with these removable stitch markers, which I really love, because then when I knit the second sleeve, I can just move the stitch markers across and know that I'm doing exactly the same amount of decreases at exactly the same rate. So really loving it. And yeah, I think one thing that I was sort of looking at is that sometimes my gauge when I'm knitting small circumferences in the round is tighter than my gauge at larger circumferences in the round, which is also confusing because this is color work, which also can make my gauge a bit tighter. And so I had this moment where I was like, is this gauge noticeably tighter than the rest of the body? And I think the answer is no, but I also think that the answer is that these are already pretty voluminous sleeves. And so if my gauge is a little bit tighter, I'm not gonna actually be too sad about that. So yeah, I think I'm just gonna go with it, you know? I think I'm just gonna keep going. I mean, obviously I'm not ripping back now, that would be ridiculous, but gonna continue with the recommended needle size, which I believe I used. Truthfully, I don't think I swatched for this at all. And the reason is because I knew that it was gonna be so oversized anyway that cast on with reckless abandon, but I am really excited to finish this. I would love to finish it as soon as possible so that I can wear it in July and February, because those are really the only months in Denver that I feel like I will actually get use out of this warm of a sweater. But this sweater also has some very, very long breaks between motifs. And so this was a sweater that I also used the ladder back jacquard method in order to catch my floats in the back of this sweater. So that is a very, very easy technique that you can find on YouTube. I just Googled ladder back jacquard, and there are tons and tons of different tutorials with how to do this technique. It's incredibly easy, and I think the best thing to do if you are having to catch floats for color work, because it just makes it completely invisible in the front. So for instance, this is the sleeve cap on this side, which you can see the ladder back jacquard, which essentially makes a second fabric layer where you're catching the floats in the back within this fabric. But then on the front, it's completely invisible. So this honestly has been the most useful technique that I learned this entire year. So yeah, I really, really loved it. Loved learning that, and the color work of this is so fun. Again, it's kind of similar to the Alaska sweater in that it is not terribly intuitive, and I would not recommend this for a beginner because it's just not super potato chippy easy to follow color work. Everything is organic, everything is different, none of it is symmetrical, and that makes it more of a challenge, but also kept me so interested and so excited. So I'm really, really excited to finish this, and hopefully we'll just bust through the last couple of sleeves in the coming days. I've been talking so much that my mouth is getting dry. Okay, I have two more things to show. The first of the two is actually some spinning finished objects that I have. So this year for my Yarny Advent calendar, I got some yarn and then some spinning fiber, which was really, really fun. I also got this drop spindle from Shocked. It's, I think, their lightest drop spindle, and got to practice spinning. What I really loved about this advent calendar, and I think it was the Nest Fiber advent calendar, is that all of the different fibers all of the different days were a different fiber, and it was so fun. I've only spun up 2 of them, but I'm looking at them all hanging up over there. It was really, really fun, even with these 2, to see how they were different and to kind of use it as a way to make some mini skeins. So, and I think my plan is to just have fun spinning and then make them into a hat or ornaments or something like that. But this was my first attempt, which honestly, I'm like pretty proud of. It's not the very first thing I've ever spun. The very first thing I ever spun was like completely unusable, but. And I would say this is probably solidly a DK weight. And it's pretty loosely spun. And then this is the second one, which is a little bit more tightly spun, and I would say is probably a sport to DK weight. And these are both 2-ply. And these were entirely natural fibers, so there's no like nylon or anything like that. I have been having so much fun with spinning. I'm addicted. I'm so addicted. So yeah, my plan is to spin up all of these, and then I'll probably choose some of them, the best ones, to kind of put together and make maybe a brioche hat out of, where one of the colors is this, and the other color is just sort of a, machine spun yarn. But I've been really enjoying it. I'm just continuing to spin on my drop spindle, so you'll see that throughout the new year, but I do really, really want a spinning wheel. It's just, they're so expensive. I need to I want to make sure that I really, really like this craft before I invest in something like a spinning wheel. Okay, I'm so excited for this. So this last project that I have is my contribution, which I guess I'll say my first contribution, because now that I've started knitting this, I am completely obsessed with this designer. But this is my contribution to the Year of Marie Wallin cal that is being led by many different podcasters who I love, and I'll put them all down. There are so many people leading this cal, but the ones that I watch religiously in particular are the Yarn Curator podcast, as well as Knitting with Cat Hair podcast. Both of those women, oh my gosh, it's incredible the amount of knitting they do and just the beautiful projects that they bust out. And they started this cal, which is just to try to knit a Marie Wallin pattern in the year. And so it didn't start the first of the year. It started, I think, in like August or September of last year. So I had already bought my yarns, which this is just a basket full of yarns, which is much less beautiful than when I showed it last time. And I had already swatched for this. This is a project. This is the Yell cardigan. Forgot to even say that. This is a project that I would highly, highly recommend swatching for a couple of different reasons. One is that you are going to be casting on a lot of stitches, and then you're going to be sticking them. And so you kind of want to make sure you get it right, because it's a lot of knitting if you're deciding to change things later, and it's harder to change things, I think, because of the steek. I guess you could make it hypothetically shorter or smaller, but anyway, you should swatch. I am not the type of person who swatches all the time, but for something like this, I feel like you should swatch. The second reason I think you should swatch for this project is that there are tons and tons of different colors, and whether you are using a similar color scheme to what Marie Wallin chose or a completely different color scheme, you are not going to understand how the colors play together unless you do a swatch. And so when I did my swatch, there was one row that I really didn't like, and I did end up changing that. So I feel like I'm teasing you all. So let me just show off how far I've gone. I was obsessed with this. I literally cast it on Boxing Day, the day after Christmas, and didn't stop knitting on it. Like this was all I worked on for the entire time we were up in Steamboat. I brought all this other knitting to work on. I was like super excited to like finish up some whips, and didn't do any of that because I started this and then I just could not stop. Anyway, here it is. I got so far. I'm so proud. So this is the entire bottom colorwork band of this sweater. I love it. I love it so much. I'm trying not to drop any stitches. Of course, it has not been blocked, so the stitches are not perfect, but I'm still so happy with how it's turning out. So I decided to essentially stick, I'm gonna hold this way. Hopefully this will be easier. I decided essentially to stick with more or less the same exact colors that Marie Wallin used. So I, for mine, am using almost entirely Jamieson's of Shetland wool, which is, that one had a sticker, right, on the front. So it's almost entirely this wool. And then, so that's Jamieson Spindrift. And then the other colors that I'm using are this Jamieson and Smith. And these will be the top of the sweater. So this gray and then a natural kind of beige color. So there are so many colors, and I love when people choose their own, but I am just not that good at color theory. Like, I cannot trust myself to do this by myself. And so I essentially just used Marie Wallin's color palette and made a couple of adjustments. So the first is that in her colors, this bottom band, this green, this dark red color that I used, which is, I think, ruby, this dark red, which again, I put in here, was supposed to be a green. It was supposed to be the same green that you see here. And I like that, but I was a little bit worried for me that it would feel very Christmassy. And that might just be because I was knitting this right around Christmas, but I decided to switch that out so that the bottom band is really just these different shades of red and this light blue and beige. The next round that I changed was this one. And so at first I really hated this yellow color, but I think that the reason why I didn't like it is that I didn't like the pairing with the green. So in my swatch, which I've shown before on the podcast, I had paired this yellow with this bright green, which let me show you. So this is the yellow, I think it's called ochre. And then this is the green that I had originally paired it with. And what I decided to do is change it out for this green. So I ended up using these two greens for that yellow stripe. And I think it made it a little bit more rustic than like Green Bay Packer, which is a American football team combo. I just was not into that. And so I really, really like how that turned out. And at first, what I was planning on doing was using a creamy yellow color for this and this stripe. But what I decided, honestly, after talking with my best friend, is that I like the funkiness of the yellow. And so now that I've made that change, I really, really like how that turned out. The next row that I changed was this row, which this row, this purple background was like probably my favorite color. You can see it here in the crosses and then here. It is the, I think it's called Thistledown. The thing I really love about Jameson Spindrift is that all of the colors are incredibly complex. So from afar, it looks kind of like a mauve-y purple, but when you come close, you just see so many different colors. I think it is perfectly illustrated in this color as well, which from afar kind of looks like a, it's hard to see here because it's coming off as like a brown, but it's this color here and here. So it's kind of like a bright red. Then when you come close, you see so much complexity in this color. Obsessed. So here, this background color was supposed to be this dark purple, but I decided to do the same ruby red that I had down here, this dark, dark burgundy, just to kind of draw it in. And then I think I switched, like flip-flopped these colors so that the blue would be the background. And lastly, the only other change I made was that I added this stripe, which is just a way to bring in more of this red color and more of the purple before the transition to the next color work. And for me, I made it much thinner of a stripe than any of the other stripes in the color work. So it's just 3 rounds where I did 1 round of knit, 1 round of every other, and then another round of knit. And so to me, I just think that that added a nice kind of break where it's like one last small round to differentiate from the rest of the color work. The other thing that I changed in this portion of the pattern is that Marie Wallin has you jump straight from the colorwork motif, the kind of rainbow colorwork motif, into this pattern. And these first patterns here have a color in the first row. And so what you can see from the rest of this patterning is that the first row of each stripe is just one color, and that really separates it from the rest of the stripe. So for instance, here there's just purple, and then the color work, and then purple, and then white, and then the color work, and then white, and then green, and then the color work, and then green, and so on. I don't know why I explained that so in-depthly, but at the top, she has you just go straight to the next pattern. And the only thing that I did is I did one stripe all the way around of the just dark gray to kind of separate this part of the pattern from the bottom so that there wouldn't be white right up against the patterning below. And I just noticed that in my swatch, honestly, which again is a reason why for a pattern like this, swatching is so important, is that I noticed with the swatch, which I don't want to grab right now for a very random reason, but it's mostly that then it's hard for me to get it back into the wall. But I noticed with the stripe, with the swatch, that I didn't like that transition, and I love it so much more now. So, oh my gosh, I'm obsessed. This is the steek at the front, and yeah, I have a feeling that now that I've gotten this far, my excitement for this project will slow ever so slightly, just because the fact that you're getting to use all of these beautiful colors of yarn, I was just like, go, 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 go. Like, I just did not want to stop. And it made me just bust through this, even though there's like over 300, I think, stitches on the needles when you're knitting this for my size, which is the smallest size. So yeah, I'm obsessed. I don't think it's gonna be too big. I've seen a lot of people who it's been too big for them, but I think it will be perfect. I mean, it definitely will be oversized, but I kind of want it to be oversized. Y'all, wow. I'm just like, what? I don't know. I feel like, have you ever had a project where you're like, is this what I've been missing? You know, like, is this what? I don't know. I feel like everybody should knit a Marie Wallin pattern because it's so fun. I'm having so much fun. So yeah, I'm so excited. Oh my gosh. I just think it's so beautiful. Every time I pick it up, I'm just like, wow, it's gorgeous. Anyway, all right. That is all of the crafting talk that I have for this podcast. And now I'm gonna move on to the books that I've been reading. All right, let's talk about books. Wow, it's been a good reading year. I will say that I set out to read 80 books in 2021, and I did not meet my goal, but I did manage to read 76 books and over 30,000 pages, which to me, I'm like, okay. With the crazy year that we've had, I'm like, I'm okay with that. I'll probably set next year to be 80 again and just try to reach it. I read, I think, almost 100 books in 2020, so I definitely came down a little bit this year. However, the books that I read this year were also quite a bit longer. I think my average book length was over 400 pages, so it's been a lot. But I did want to talk about all of the books that I have finished recently and that I am currently reading. And yeah, let's get started. I think I'll start off by a few romances that I've read in the last few weeks. And the first one, I'm like trying to remember where I left off from you guys. It's like been a while. So let me talk about the Ex Hex by Erin Sterling, I think. This was a very fun, you know, pretty sexy rom-com about witches. It essentially follows a witch and another witch who live, another witch who's a male witch, who live in Georgia, and the male witch, I think he's from Wales or something like that, and he has to come, his family kind of started this community, and so he has to come for recharging the ley lines and come for a very specific festival. And these two people, when they were teenagers, like 10 years ago, had this beautiful love affair that then ended very roughly. And so it's kind of a like haters to lovers, but also a fun, like, kind of like, we had our time and you ruined it, and now it's like kind of rekindling that love or that passion, that romance many years later. So it was fun, it was witchy. I gifted the book to my sister-in-law, so I would highly recommend it for a quick, fast, fun read, especially around Halloween, because it's very kind of witchy and fun and perfect for that season. So pick it up next year if you're interested. I think I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. The next thing I'll talk about is The Portrait of a Scotsman by Evie Dunmore, which I don't think I'd read since we last talked, and that was great. Another installment in the League of Extraordinary Women series by Evie Dunmore, which I've loved all 3 of them so far. This one was probably my least favorite of the 3. So the first one was so good, and that was kind of a Pride and Prejudice style, kind of like haters to lovers romance. The second one was a friends to lovers romance, and this one was the close proximity trope. So essentially this one follows Hattie, who she essentially gets herself into a very tricky situation in sort of Victorian, Edwardian, I don't know exactly, I'm not like a history buff, England, and ends up having to marry this Scotsman. And when they get married, they're like not in love. They definitely have a robust attraction to one another, but they're not in love. And it's kind of about them getting to know each other and finding out that maybe this is more than they thought it was gonna be. So it's great. The last romance I think that I have to talk about is The Love Hypothesis, which was by Ali Hazelwood. I think I'll have all of the pictures up. By Ali Hazelwood. And this was great. This was one of my favorite romances that I read this whole year. Man, it's like the fake dating trope, which honestly with the fake dating trope, I do feel like you have to kind of just leave reality at the door. Like, it's not something that I would ever get myself into, and I think nobody that I know of would ever get themselves into this type of situation, but neither here nor there. It was great. It followed 2 people, so one of which is a like tenured professor, and one is a young woman who is working towards her PhD in the sciences. And it was so fun to read a romance about people within this field, because it's a field that I'm part of, and so fun to see a story about women in STEM and the ways in which women in STEM are treated and how hard it is to be in math and science and engineering as a woman, even today, you know, or especially today. I mean, women weren't even in the fields at all before. So anyhow, it was really fun. It was really steamy. I really enjoyed it. I think I gave that one like a good 3.5 or 4 out of 5. Like, I really, really enjoyed it for a romance. It was really fun. And the last romance I have to talk about, I realize there's one more, is The 12 Dates of Christmas, I believe is what it was called, and I don't remember the author of that, I'm sorry. This was a fun holiday rom-com, and I decided to read this because I had read In a Holidays last year by Christina Lauren, and I really, really loved that book. And I think the reason why I love that book so much is that it took place in the Rocky Mountains of the United States, and that is where I grew up. And so for me, It didn't get everything perfectly right because I don't think that the authors are from that area, but it did get a lot of things right, and it was just really, really fun to read for me specifically. And I also really like the friends to lovers trope. That is like one of my favorites. I love a slow burn. I think for me, it's because my like love story is a friends to lovers story, and so I think for me, I just really enjoy that trope in general, and so it was perfect for me. This one was The 12 Dates of Christmas, was about a woman who decides to go on this sort of, or not go on, who decides to partake in this very specific dating kind of like, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like organized dating that is taking place in this community where sort of the 12 days leading up to Christmas, you go on these 12 different dates with different strangers. And you're following her as she's meeting these different men and deciding if she likes them. And it kind of almost feels like a Bachelor, but they're all dating, kind of intermingling, these people who have signed up for this kind of like blind date organized thing. I don't know how to describe it. And it was really good. I think that there's, you know, definitely, I don't want to give too much away because I think part of this story is like you finding out who she's gonna be with, and like I knew right from the beginning who she was gonna end up with, which I think is fun, but it's about the journey to get there, and it's about all the characters figuring out that that's what they want and that's the goal, etc. It was very fun. I will say, which I don't know what this says about me, but I do enjoy some steaminess to my romance novels. Like I want some sex scenes, okay? Like, you know, more power to you if that is not what you want. And I think if that is not what you want, this book would be great for you. But the fact that there was like no steamy parts in this book, I was kind of like, okay, fine, you know? But so just know that going in. Either that's a huge positive for you or a minor negative for you. But so those are the like 4 romances that I've read in the last couple of months, and they were all enjoyable. I think, you know, you go into romance, at least I go into romance, knowing that this is not gonna be like my favorite book of all time, but boy, is it a fun ride while it's happening, you know? It's just pure escapism and making you feel better and knowing that everything is going to turn out okay in the end, which sometimes that's all we can ask for. Now to some really great books that I did finish very recently. The first one that I will talk about is The Wise Man's Fear by Patrick Rothfuss. I have been talking about this book quite a bit, as well as the first book in this supposed to be trilogy. Kind of feels like a duology because this was written many, many, many years ago, and the third one, who knows where it will be, who knows when it will come out, but it's fine. I finished The Wise Man's Fear and I did enjoy it. So I think that there are some, I feel like most people really, really love this series, and I do lie within that group of people. I loved this. I will say that I did not love this book nearly as much as I loved the first book, which Patrick Rothfuss, the first book is just incredible. I like cannot even begin to describe how much I loved that book. And I think that there are a lot of people who will feel differently about it because it is slow, it is character driven, it's not super action packed, but for me, I just loved it. I love Quoth, I love the story, I love the storytelling. It's so beautiful, it's so engrossing. This book I also loved. And it's hard because I can't really talk about it because you have to read the first book before you read this book. But this book did feel to me like a second in a trilogy. So oftentimes I feel like the first book you're kind of like building up to something and laying the groundwork and you're getting introduced to all these characters. And the second book can sometimes feel like you're continuing on and the journey is important, but there's no real resolution of anything. And then the third book is like, you put in all of this effort and you get this like amazing last book. And so it was a little bit disappointing simply because the third book may never be written and likely won't be finished. And so I think for me, I finished this book and I really, really enjoyed the journey. But when I got to the end, it was very anticlimactic because I knew that I would never get a real ending for the book. So I still think that it's worth reading. In particular, the first book in the Kingkiller Chronicles series, I think is a masterpiece. This one is also very good, but it's just sad that it will never get finished. I mean, I hope it will. Listen, Patrick Rothfuss is like not that old. He's actually like middle-aged. And so there's a chance, but I just feel like I don't know what's going on, why he can't finish it. But I also like couldn't write something like this. And so I can't like be mad that he's not done. You know, I'm just like sad for myself that it's a wonderful book, but a second in a trilogy and a trilogy that may never be finished. So, you know, it is what it is. It was still very good though. And I highly, highly, highly recommend the Kingkiller Chronicles because it's just such a wild ride. I mean, to the point that I got a tattoo for this series because I loved it so much, especially the first book. The next book I have to talk about is Transcendent Kingdom by Gyasi. And this was so good. Oh my God. I knew this was going to be really good. And then I started reading it and I actually put off reading it for a while. And the reason why I put off reading it is because I knew that it was going to be very heavy. And I was right. It is very heavy, but I will say that it's so, so beautiful and so worth reading. Like I highly, highly recommend this novel. And it's really short. The amount that she packs in to a like less than 300-page book is astonishing, especially when you're used to reading like fantasies that are like 1,000 pages. I'm like, this craft is insane. So this follows an immigrant family that has moved to the United States and kind of what it means to be an immigrant in the United States and what it means to grow up in the United States within that context. And the main character actually goes in to get her PhD in neuroscience. And it's so interesting. She essentially is wanting to study addiction and how that impacts the brain and maybe why we are drawn to substances and why addiction happens from a very like neurobiological base. And it is so interesting. And the reason why she does that, which this, I believe is, yes. So this is in the very beginning, the description of the book. And so I don't feel like I just want to make sure I wasn't giving anything away. But she decides to study neuroscience and specifically studying addiction and how that relates to neuroscience because her older brother died of a heroin overdose. And so it is so beautiful to read about her love for her brother and her love for her family, but how difficult it was growing up in a different country than where your parents came from and having kind of a broken household. And then how the opioid epidemic impacts her very directly, how her community, who originally, you know, thought of her brother as this amazing superstar, then completely disowns him when he kind of gets drawn into the addictions that were started because a doctor prescribed him medications. And then how she decides to take that disappointment and sadness of losing her brother and try to learn about it. And in learning about it from a neurobiological standpoint, also reflecting on her family. And the interconnectedness in this book is so, so beautiful. The writing is incredible. 5 out of 5. I absolutely loved this book, but obviously go into it knowing that it covers some very, very heavy subject matter. There is discussions of racism. There are discussions of addiction, death, losing a brother, losing a father. There's a lot. So it's definitely not an easy read and not a heartwarming read, but it is so beautiful and so important and so worth it that I highly recommend it. I know Gyasi wrote, I think, Homecoming. They wrote another book as well, and I definitely need to pick it up this year because this was phenomenal. The next book that I finished since we talked last is another fantasy novel. Wintertime, I feel like I really, really enjoy fantasy. And so I picked up Spinning Silvwr by Naomi Novik, and this was great. This follows, it's a multi-perspective story. It's a standalone fantasy, which is so nice. It's written by a woman, pretty much about women, and it's so good. It's about this woman named Miriam who is a moneylender's daughter, and she has a knack for turning silver into gold, but more, you know, in the human realm, that is more about kind of taking a small amount of money and making a lot of money from that. And she becomes intertwined with this kind of fairy realm, and I don't want to talk too much more about it, but it's so good. And there's a lot of discussion about spinning wool, about knitting. It's very wintry because it takes place in like a winter world. So honestly, like, this is the time of year to read this book. It's so good. And I do feel like as knitters, like, this is kind of the perfect book for us. It is really fun and I highly recommend it. It was great. I really enjoyed it. I also think that the magic was great. The world building was really great. It was very easy to digest and nice that it's a standalone. You know, I do really get sucked into long fantasy novels and trilogies and series of fantasy because I do think that there is a complexity and beauty to the world building that can just be so much more engrossing in those longer series. But it's sometimes really nice to just get a bite-sized blip and take it in, enjoy a well-rounded story, and be done with it. Like, I don't always need to have these crazy long series. So yeah, really, really enjoyed this. Highly recommend, especially for spinners, knitters. It's like fantasy written for us. It's so great. And then the last book that I'm reading is, believe it or not, a nonfiction book, which I never read nonfiction, but I'm like gonna push a baby out of my vagina in a few months, and so want to read about it, which is crazy because as a doctor, you know, in medical school, we spend a lot of time going to births, and as a pediatrician, I also am present at many, many births, but kind of to take the baby and like resuscitate the baby if need be. And so I have seen a lot of birth, but I have not experienced birth myself. And in fact, I would like to unsee a lot of births that I've seen, only because people deal with this type of pain, rushes, whatever you want to call it. People deal with it differently. And it's just hard when you are a young, impressionable person to like see that, and it's a lot. And so I wanted to start off by reading Ina May's Guide to Childbirth, which is by Ina May Gaskin, who is like a world-renowned midwife here in the United States. And this is essentially her guide to childbirth. And it definitely takes a very kind of hippie granola childbirth philosophy, but like, that's the world I grew up in, you know? Like, I am open. I think for me, I'm just excited to experience childbirth with whatever comes, you know? I think I joke a lot about how I'm like, get an epidural in me right away. And I think that I probably will get an epidural at some point, but I don't know. I've never experienced this before, and I'd like to go as long as I can experiencing unmedicated birth. And I don't know why. I think like there's nothing that I can pinpoint. I definitely don't want to give birth at home. I definitely want to give birth in a hospital just because I've seen a lot and I want to be in the hospital. But at the same time, I think that there is something beautiful about the experience of birth. And it's so interesting. I had a midwife say to me when I was in my training, you know, that that giving birth is a normal biological action. It's not a pathology, meaning it's not a disease. And so that has really stuck with me, and I think that's so interesting. And so I am, you know, hoping to go as far as I can, but also being very gentle with myself that, you know, whatever comes will come. I've never done this before. So anyway, I am reading this, and so the first part of this book is all kind of birth stories. So it's a bunch of different women telling the stories of the births that they had. And they're all very positive birth stories, which is something that I needed. I needed to like be reminded that this is like gonna be great. And then the second half is really going into kind of the actual guide to birth that Ina May is giving you. And so I actually stopped reading that because I'm hoping to journal through this part, and I really enjoyed taking in the birth stories, but at this point I'd really like to slow down and really read this book really in-depthly and take a lot of notes and things like that so that I can come back to them and remember, you know, when I'm freaking out because I'm having all these rushes, that this is normal, and to relax, and yeah, different tools to help me do that. So anyway, I am really enjoying this. I have a few different books that I'm gonna read, but this to me was the most important one because I think a lot of books about childbirth are really important to read. But for me as a medical professional, as someone who has learned a lot about birth and delivered babies, I am less concerned about reading like all of the books because like I've experienced this on the other side, but really wanted to read a book like this that would make me feel empowered to experience birth as the beautiful thing that it is. Does that make sense? Anyway, all right. That is all I have, which is good because I've been talking for forever. So I am gonna leave you there. Like I said, I have a couple of other things that will be coming out over the next few days, so keep your eyes peeled for those. But for now, I'm wishing you joy and comfort and solace, and I hope that you are taking some time to reflect about what you are most interested in with 2022 and doing a reset and just kind of taking time to think about what this rebirth of 2022 means to you and what you hope to get out of the year or years, hopefully years to come. So with that, stay safe, take care of each other, and thank you so much for being here. It's been an amazing ride. I essentially started this podcast this time last year and have built such a beautiful, beautiful community here on YouTube. So thank you for that, and I'll see you soon. Bye.
Oh, are you having so much fun, buddy?